In the few minutes that I have left, I want to spend time talking about the outlook for GST collections. We've seen GST collections on a monthly basis hover in the range of about 1.5 lakh crore rupees. Is that, Pranjal, where you see GST collections stay next year? Do you see a potential for a moderate to high increase, or do you actually see them come down on a monthly average basis?
Well, it should rise in line with nominal GDP growth. But if you want it to rise even more sharply, like we saw over the last year, I think we need continued reforms in GST. We need to get more items into the GST umbrella. We need to talk about lesser number of slabs, more uniform rates. I think we need more reforms on GST if we want continued improvement.
Which of course every economist and right-thinking person would want. But Samiran, are you concerned that given the practical reality of this being a general election year, that any reform, whether it is on the GST side, whether it is on tax, or whether it is in terms of pushing through hard disinvestment, will actually now only be seriously considered after the 2024 general elections? Or do you think that the government could potentially surprise?
So just a quick point on GST is that this is a peculiar year where for the first time the central government will be collecting 1.4 lakh crores of GST compensation cess, but will not have to share it with the state governments. So that's going to make the fiscal arithmetic look much easier for the central government. But on the reforms question, I think where I started from is where I would want to end with. Public capex is one area which I call reforms, which will have no political ramifications. So it's the easiest one to push even in a pre-election year. If you look at other reforms that economists typically talk about, there are winners and losers in those reforms. And typically every finance minister will be very considerate about implementing those reforms in a pre-election year. So I'm not penciling in too many of those reforms for this year, but public capex push is something which everyone likes, affects everyone positively, so why not do it?
Soumya Kanti Ghosh, are you surprised with the government's approach on disinvestment? Arguably the most vexatious PSU to disinvest was Air India, which got pushed through with a lot of determination, and a lot of other strategic disinvestments, which should arguably have been easier to find a way to push through, have somehow not been done. And are you fearful that given the fact that we have an election, that a lot of this could be pushed out till after the next general elections?
Yeah, I think the answer is both yes and no. In terms of the disinvestment, I believe that more could have been done. But on
this is what economists love to do. They like to give answers which have both yes and no, and everybody else, like normal citizens, wondering, did he mean the yes more than, or did he mean the no more?
I'll explain that. But the good thing is that the government has been able to compensate the decline in disinvestment revenue through a surge in the tax collections. The tax buoyancy ratio, which is historically at 1.1, means that it has been much higher in the last 3 years. So whatever has been the shortfall in the non-tax revenue has been compensated by the tax revenue, and that is because of the efforts which the government has been doing. So in my sense, yes, there could be a shortfall in disinvestment, or may not be that to the extent which we could anticipate. But my sense is that a large part of that will be offset by a buoyancy in the tax revenue.
Now you have to explain the yes and no on disinvestment. It can either be a yes, that they will push through on disinvestment despite it being a general election year, or it can be a no, they are more likely to push it out till after the next elections and not take any panga at this moment.
I think in terms of the disinvestment, some of this is very politically sensitive. Also in terms of the privatization, I think maybe that may not be touched this year. Maybe that could be pushed next year. But there is always this helping hand in terms of the tax buoyancy.